So what's the process now that you've found a property that you want to actually go ahead and purchase? Now there's a bit of research that you need to do, but the first step is to actually hold the property. And so you do this by signing a sale and purchase agreement subject to your due diligence. So you can pull out of the contract if it's not the right property after you've done this due diligence. Now, often in a sale and purchase agreement, you'll include things like your lawyer's approval to the contract. You'll include a finance clause, a due diligence clause, so you can do all of your research, and you might have things like limb and a title and a building report if it's an existing property. Now, it's really important that you have the property on hold by putting it under contract before you do all of your due diligence, because you need to be certain you can actually get the property at that price to make it a viable investment. And because due diligence takes some time, energy and money, again, you want to secure the property before you do all of this. A different type of purchase is an auction. And an auction, you have to have done all your due diligence before you bid, because once you are successful at purchasing at auction, you're unconditional from day one. The most important thing in your due diligence period is that you're organised and you have your team around you to help you through the process. There's going to be a lot going on. You're going to be waiting for a bank to give you an approval, your solicitor's going to be checking the contract, your accountant's going to be giving you structure advice, so you need to make sure everyone's ready and knows their piece of the puzzle. In terms of cost for your due diligence, this is part of your setup cost, but even if you don't go ahead with the property, you might have some costs, such as evaluation. If you're buying outside of your city, there might be travel to that city to actually go and have a look at the property. There might be a little bit of setup costs with your accountant. And of course, if you get a valuation in this time, that will cost you upfront as well, regardless of if you proceed with the property purchase. Again, to stress, this is why you have the property on hold before you do your complete due diligence, because if you can't secure that property at the right price, then there's no point investing this money into something that's not going to work as an investment. Now, you don't need to be worried about signing a sale and purchase if you've got appropriate exit clause like a due diligence clause in there. And that's because it's only a contract to hold at this stage until you've done your due diligence. So make sure you have something like that in there, and or you have a solicitor check over the contract before you sign it to make sure that you've got an exit. The three main clauses that I want to see in a sale and purchase before I sign them are lawyer's approval clause, because there's a lot of legal terminology in a sale and purchase agreement, and you want your lawyer to be able to check over this and make sure that it protects you appropriately. You want a finance clause in there if you're going to be getting a loan from a bank. And I think a due diligence clause is really important, again, so that you can hold the property and then conduct your full due diligence afterwards before making a full commitment to buying the property. You'll find these clauses towards the back of the contract, generally speaking. And if you're working with a real estate agent, normally they've got these clauses templated in there. And I think the recommended time frame that I would use would be 10 to 15 days for finance and due diligence, and at least a few days for your lawyer. This whole process puts you in the driving seat. So you've got to remember you're responsible for checking off all of these conditions and making sure that you're satisfied. If you're working with someone like a property partner, often they'll guide you through the process and make sure that all your professionals are talking to one another to get the best result. Now, once you're entirely satisfied and you've decided you want to proceed with this investment, that's when you'll go unconditional, which means you're committed to buying this property. This happens when you let your lawyer know that you've satisfied your conditions and yourself that you're happy to proceed, and at this stage, your lawyer will let the vendor's lawyer know that the conditions have been met and satisfied and you want to proceed. It's at this time that you would generally pay a deposit to hold that property and secure it formally. Often a deposit will be 10% of the purchase price paid into a trust account of some sort. Now, if you're borrowing 100% and your deposit's coming from existing equity, then normally the bank will set up a facility and advance you that 10% deposit, and then the money can be paid to your lawyer. Before settlement, it's important that you go through the property and make sure everything's in order as you expected. If it's not, then you have to talk to your lawyer about holding funds back at settlement to ensure everything's completed, or negotiate with the vendor. So just before settlement of the property, it's really important that you do what's called a pre-settlement inspection. And this is where you go and physically inspect the property to make sure everything's in order as expected. You want to make sure that all the fixtures and fittings are there, all the appliances are there, and the house is in a state that's ready to rent. Normally your property manager would advertise your property a couple of weeks out from settlement, but when you've got a settlement date, they want a settlement date to ensure that if they have inquiry, they can actually give a prospective tenant a date that they can move in. But you don't want to leave this too far out, because you don't want the property to be advertised and go stale online and just get fall off inquiry. You want to avoid as much vacancy as possible by finding a tenant as quickly as possible to move in as close to settlement. Now just remember, if there's a delay between you going unconditional and paying a deposit and the house being finished, doesn't mean you're not a property investor. If you've paid a deposit, you have a financial interest in that property and you've secured that property at that value. So in essence, you are a property investor that day.